There is a kind of waiting that does not look like waiting. It looks like getting up. It looks like going to work and making dinner and answering the phone and being present for every ordinary requirement of a life, while carrying, underneath all of it, a specific and unrelenting ache that does not take days off and does not respond to reason and does not care that you have things to do. Loretta Mae Simmons had been doing this kind of waiting for 3 years, 2 months, and 11 days. She knew the number exactly. She was not the kind of woman who tracked things obsessively. She was not by nature a counter or a cataloger. She was a practical woman. A warm one. The kind whose house always had food in it, and whose door was understood by the neighborhood to be a door you could knock on. She had lived for 27 years in the same house in Shreveport, Louisiana, on Malham Street. A white house with green shutters that she had painted herself in 2009 with her son Deshaun's help. The two of them on ladders on a Saturday in October, arguing cheerfully about the right way to cut in around the window frames, Deshaun doing it wrong and being corrected and doing it wrong again in the exact same way, which was so consistent with who he was that she had laughed until she had to hold on to the ladder. That was the memory she went to most. The ladder, the green paint, the arguing about the window frames. She was 61 years old. She had raised Deshaun alone from the time he was 7 years old, when his father Raymond had left for reasons that were complicated at the time and simple in retrospect. She had worked as a home health aide for 26 years, going to other people's houses, taking care of other people's parents and grandparents, helping people in the last chapters of their lives maintain some portion of dignity and comfort. She was good at this work in the specific way that people are good at things they were built for. She knew how to be present without being intrusive. She knew how to read a room's emotional weather. She knew that sometimes the most important thing you could do for a person was simply stay. Not fix, not explain, just stay. She had stayed for Deshaun through everything. Through the years when he was difficult, which were several, and the years when he was lost, which overlapped with the difficult ones, and the year he made the decision that changed everything, the decision that had put 3 years and 2 months and 11 days between them. Deshaun Marcus Simmons was 34 years old. He had his mother's eyes and his father's stubbornness, and a laugh that, when it came, when he actually let it come, which required the right conditions, filled whatever room he was in so completely that people turned toward it the way plants turn toward light. He had not had many occasions for that laugh in the past 3 years. He had had other occasions that required different things of him, occasions that had, over time and with difficulty, begun to build something in him that the laugh was starting to find its way back into. He was serving a sentence at David Wade Correctional Center in Homer, Louisiana. He had been there for 3 years, 2 months, and 11 days. He would be eligible for parole review in 4 months. Loretta had not seen him in all of that time. This requires explanation, because the explanation is the heart of the story, and the heart of the story is not what most people assume when they hear the first part. Loretta had not stayed away because she had given up on her son. She had not stayed away because she was ashamed, though the world had tried, in the particular way the world tries, to make her feel that she should be. She had not stayed away because she did not love him, or because she had decided he deserved the distance. She had stayed away because Deshaun had asked her to. He had asked her in a letter, written 3 weeks after he arrived, in handwriting she recognized as the handwriting of someone who was writing carefully, who was choosing every word. He had said that he needed to do this part alone, that he needed to know he could, that every time she came, he felt the weight of what he had cost her, and the weight made it harder to do the work he was trying to do, and the work was the only thing that mattered right now, and he needed her to trust him enough to let him do it without her watching. He had said, "Mama, I need you to let me earn my way back, not be given back." She had read this letter 4 times. She had called her pastor, who had known Deshawn since he was 9 years old. She had called her friend Claudette, who had known her longer than anyone. She had sat with it for a week. She had written back and said, "I hear you. I will do what you need. I will be here when you are ready." She had been here for 3 years, 2 months, and 11 days. She had written every week. She had not missed a single week. She wrote about Malam Street and the neighbors and what was growing in the garden and who had gotten married and who had passed and what she had cooked and what the weather was doing and what she was reading. She wrote about everything except how much she missed him, because he had asked her to let him do the work without the weight, and the weight was how much she missed him, and she honored that even though honoring it cost her something she had no words for. She sent the letters to a P.O. box that his case counselor had set up. She did not know for certain he was reading them. He was reading them. He had read every one. He had them in a folder in his cell, in order, every week for 3 years, 2 months, and 11 days. She had one photograph on her nightstand. The latter. October 2009. Deshawn, 21 years old, paint on his forearm, looking at something off camera and laughing. She said goodnight to it every night. She said good morning to it every morning. She did not find this embarrassing to admit. She had gotten past embarrassment about how much she loved her son approximately 34 years ago. She told people he was away. She did not elaborate. Some people understood. Some people nodded in the way that contained a judgment she had learned to let pass over her. Her pastor never nodded that way. Claudette never nodded that way. Her clients, the elderly people in their homes, the ones she cared for, never nodded that way, because they had lived long enough to know that the lines between the people who made certain choices and the people who did not were thinner than anyone comfortable wanted to admit. She prayed for Deshawn every morning. Specifically, not generally, not the broad request for safety and guidance that covers everything and risks nothing, but specifically. She prayed for the work he was doing. She prayed for his counselor, whose name was Marcus, who Deshawn had mentioned twice in letters. She prayed for the men around him. She prayed that the laugh was finding its way back. She prayed, every morning, for 4 more months to pass quickly. The Family Feud application had been Claudette's idea, and the execution of it had been a small act of creative coordination that Loretta did not fully understand until later. Claudette had applied for the show on behalf of the Simmons family in January. The team was Loretta, Claudette, Loretta's younger sister Darlene, who was 58 and who drove down from Minden every time Loretta needed her without being asked, Darlene's son Kwame, who was 31 and who was Deshawn's closest cousin and who had visited Deshawn 4 times in 3 years and had carried messages between them in both directions without ever being asked to keep it secret or to tell it, and Claudette's daughter Nia, who was 27 and who had grown up in Loretta's kitchen and who called her Miss Loretta and meant it as a full title of honor. What Loretta did not know, what Claudette had spent 6 weeks arranging through the show's production team, through Deshawn's case counselor Marcus, and through a program coordinator at David Wade, who handled exactly this kind of facilitated family contact, was that Deshawn had agreed to a supervised video appearance. Not in the studio, not in person. The logistics of a physical appearance were beyond what the timeline allowed. But a live video connection, Deshawn, in a room at the facility with his counselor Marcus present, connected in real time to the stage at Studio 27 in Burbank, California, had been arranged, verified, cleared through the institution, and kept completely secret from Loretta for 6 weeks. Deshawn had been told on a Tuesday morning. His counselor Marcus had sat across from him and explained what the show's producers were proposing. Deshawn had not spoken for a long time. Then he had said, "She kept writing." Marcus had said, "Every week." Deshawn had said, "I know. I have them all." He had said yes. He had said it the way his mother said yes to things that scared her, without hesitation, before the fear could organize itself into reasons. He had spent 4 days writing something, not a letter. He wrote it, and rewrote it, and wrote it again. On the morning of the taping, he had the final version in his hand. He had read it so many times he no longer needed the paper. He kept it anyway. The studio held 283 people the afternoon the Simmons family came to tape. The competing family, the Henderson family from Houston, was warm, spirited, the kind of family that arrived already having fun and kept having it. The warm-up comedian had the room in good shape. Steve Harvey walked out in a dark burgundy suit, and the room rose. Loretta Simmons was wearing a yellow dress. She had bought it for Easter 2 years ago and had not worn it since, because every time she reached for it, she thought about how she had bought it thinking she might wear it the day Deshawn came home. And then, Deshawn had not come home, and the dress had stayed in the closet. She had taken it out this morning in the hotel room in Burbank and put it on because Claudette had told her to wear something that made her feel like herself, and this was the dress she had bought for a day that was still coming. And wearing it felt like keeping faith with that day. She looked like herself. She looked like someone who had been waiting with her whole chest for 3 years and who had not let the waiting make her smaller. The first round went to the Hendersons. The second went to the Simmons family. Kwame got the top answer on the face-off, and the family erupted. Loretta put her hand briefly to her mouth and then composed herself, because she had a system for composure too, not unlike Margaret Okafor's, built from the same raw material of being a woman who could not afford to come apart in public. Then Steve Harvey came to her. He did the thing he did, moved through the team, easy and warm, a word here, a question there. He reached Loretta. "Tell me about yourself," he said. She told him the brief version. Shreveport, home health aide. 26 years. "You have kids?" she said. "One son. He here today?" Loretta pressed her lips together once. She said, "He couldn't be here in person." Steve Harvey looked at her. He had the cards. He knew what was on them. He looked at her with the specific attention of someone who knows what is coming and who understands that the moment before a thing happens is as important as the thing itself. "What's his name?" Steve said. "Deshawn," she said. "When did you last see Deshawn?" Loretta said, 3 years, 2 months. She paused. "And some days." The studio fell completely silent. Steve Harvey nodded slowly. He held the moment. He let the number sit in the room. "He know you're here today?" Steve said. And Loretta said, "I don't know. I hope so." The studio fell completely silent. Steve Harvey looked at the stage manager. The stage manager nodded. Behind the family podium, a large screen, the one normally used for the answer board, had been reconfigured. The production team had arranged this in the 2-minute break before the previous round. Nobody on the Simmons team had been told. Nobody in the audience had been told. The screen had been dark. It was not dark anymore. On the screen was a room, a plain room, institutional, with a table and 2 chairs. In one chair sat a man in a gray shirt. He had his mother's eyes. He had a laugh that, when it came, filled every room it entered. He was not laughing now. He was looking at the camera with an expression that was not quite any one thing. It was the expression of someone who has been doing very hard work for a very long time and who has arrived, finally, at the moment the work was for. He had the letters in front of him, the whole folder, 3 years, 2 months, and 11 days of letters In order. Loretta turned. The studio fell completely silent. 283 people. Every camera. Every crew member in that building. Steve Harvey. The Henderson family from Houston. The warm-up comedian in the wings who had stayed to watch. All of it went so quiet that the sound engineer later said he could hear the ventilation system clearly for the first time all day. Loretta Simmons looked at her son on a screen in Burbank, California, and her son looked at his mother, and neither of them spoke for a long moment, and the silence was not empty. It was the fullest silence in the room's history. It was full of 3 years of letters about the weather and the garden and the neighbors. It was full of a photograph on a nightstand and a goodnight said to it every night. It was full of a folder of letters kept in order in a cell in Homer, Louisiana, and a morning prayer that was always specific, always him, always the laugh finding its way back. Loretta said, "Baby," 1 word. The whole 3 years in 1 word. Deshawn said, "Mama." The studio fell completely silent. And then it wasn't. It became the sound 283 people make when they witness something they were not prepared to witness. Not applause. Not quite. Something underneath applause. Something that comes from the chest rather than the hands. A camera operator pressed both hands over her face. Steve Harvey stood at the center of the stage and did not move. His jaw was working. He looked at the ceiling once, briefly, the way he looked at the ceiling, when something was too large for any other direction. Then he looked back at the screen. Then he looked at Loretta. He said nothing. There was nothing to say that would not be less than what was already in the room. He let them have it. Deshawn spoke first, when he was ready. He looked at his mother in her yellow dress and he said, "You wore yellow." She said, "I bought it for the day you come home." He said, "I know. You wrote about it." He stopped. "You wrote about everything." She said, "I didn't know if you were reading." He said, "Every one. Every week." He picked up the folder and held it toward the camera, briefly, so she could see it. All of them. In order. Loretta Simmons put her hand over her mouth. Her shoulders moved. Darlene put her arm around her sister and kept it there. Claudette, standing on the other side, reached over and held Loretta's other hand. Nia, 27 years old, who had grown up in Loretta's kitchen, pressed her face against Kwame's shoulder. Kwame was looking at his cousin on the screen with the expression of a man who had carried messages in both directions for 3 years, and who was watching those messages arrive, finally, in the same room. Steve Harvey was not done. Deshawn looked at his mother and he said, "I have something I want to say. I wrote it. Can I say it?" Loretta said, "Say it, baby." Deshawn looked at the paper in his hand. Then he put it down. He did not need it. He had read it enough times. He said, "You wrote me every week for 3 years, and you never once made me feel guilty in a single letter. You told me about the garden and the neighbors and what you cooked, and you trusted me. I asked you to let me do it alone, and you let me do it alone, and you kept writing anyway, and I want you to know." He stopped. His jaw worked. "I want you to know that those letters were the thing. When things were hard in here, which they were, which they are. I read the letters. I didn't read the one about the guilty feeling I owed you. I read the one about the collard greens. I read the one about Mr. Harris next door getting a new dog. I read about the thing Claudette said at church that made you laugh." He stopped again. "You gave me back the world. Every week. You kept the world alive for me, and you kept me in it, and I am going to spend the rest of my life being the son that deserved that." The studio fell completely silent. Steve Harvey pressed his lips together. He turned away from the camera for a moment. When he turned back, his face had the look of a man who has been moved past the point of managing it, and who has decided, in this room with these people, not to manage it. "I want to talk to everyone watching at home," he said. His voice was quiet. Careful, the way a voice gets when it is carrying something that could break if handled wrong. There is a mother in this country right now, more than one, more than 100, more than we want to count, who is waiting for someone, who writes letters they don't know are being read, who keeps a photograph on a nightstand, who wears the yellow dress she bought for a day that hasn't come yet. He stopped. And there is someone receiving those letters, who is doing the hardest work of their life, and who is holding on to the letters about the collard greens. Another pause. I want both of those people to hear me. The love got through. It always gets through. Even when it looks like silence, it gets through. The studio fell completely silent. But Steve Harvey wasn't done. He turned to Kwame. "You visited," he said, 4 times. Kwame said, "He's my brother, not by blood. But that's my brother." Steve Harvey nodded. He looked at Claudette. "And you set this up?" Claudette said, "I just made some calls." Steve Harvey said, "You changed this woman's life today. You know that?" Claudette looked at Loretta. She said, "She would have done it for me." The studio stood up. The Henderson family from Houston, their captain, a man named Terrence, who had been standing on his side of the stage with his family in various states of emotional undoing for the past 15 minutes, Terrence walked across the stage. He didn't say anything elaborate. He walked up to Loretta and said, "We're rooting for your son." His family came with him. They stood on the Simmons side of the stage, all of them together, and nobody moved them back, and nobody suggested they should go back. And Steve Harvey looked at this. 2 families who had come as competitors standing together on one side of a stage, and he said nothing, because there was nothing left to say. Steve Harvey wasn't done yet. He called the stage manager after a 6-minute consultation with producers and a brief additional exchange with the facility coordinator on Deshawn's end. He made his announcements. Both families would receive the full prize package. Through the Steve Harvey Foundation, the Simmons family would receive a support package covering full funding for Loretta's travel and accommodation for monthly visits to David Wade for the remaining 4 months of Deshawn's sentence, beginning the following week. A reentry support package for Deshawn covering job placement counseling, transitional housing assistance, and legal aid services upon release, and a fund of $15,000 designated for Loretta and Deshawn's first 30 days together after release, for whatever they needed. No restrictions, no requirements, just the first 30 days. Total value, $52,000. He said. She kept writing. "The least we can do is make sure she gets to be there for the rest of it." On the screen, Deshawn Freeman heard this. He did not speak for a moment. Then he looked at the camera, at his mother in her yellow dress in a studio in Burbank, California, and he said, "I'll see you next week, Mama," Loretta said. "I'll be there." She said it the way she had always said it, without hesitation. Before the fear could organize itself into reasons, the clip went up that night. 3 recordings, the clearest from the 7th row. By morning, combined views were at 19 million. By the end of the first week, 88 million, trending in 22 countries. A reentry advocacy organization shared it with their entire national network. A prison reform coalition used it in a congressional briefing the following month. A professor of criminology at Howard University assigned it to her class with the note, "This is what human dignity looks like when it is protected rather than stripped." The comment with the highest engagement, 1,014,000 likes. The highest single comment in the show's history across any platform was posted by a woman who wrote only this: "She wore the dress she bought for the day he comes home. I am not okay. I will never be okay. This is everything." Below it were 89,000 replies. Many of them were from people who were also not okay. Many of them were from people who had someone they were writing to. Many of them were from people who were receiving letters they had not yet acknowledged. The replies kept coming for months. 3 months later, Loretta Simmons had made 12 visits to David Wade Correctional Center in Homer, Louisiana, every week, as promised. The foundation covered the travel, and Loretta Simmons would have found a way to cover it herself if they hadn't, because she had been finding ways for 34 years, and 4 more months was not going to stop her. She and Deshawn sat across a table from each other every week for 1 hour, and they talked about the garden and the neighbors and what she had cooked and what he was reading and what the counselor Marcus had said and what Deshawn was thinking about for after, which was a conversation they were having now, openly, without the weight of everything unsaid pressing down on it. She brought the photograph. The latter. October 2009. She put it on the table every week, and they looked at it together, and one week Deshawn said, "We should paint the shutters again when I get home. The green is starting to go." Loretta said she had been thinking the same thing. She said she had bought the paint already. He said, of course she had. She said it was a very specific green, and she didn't want them to run out. He said, "Mama." She said, "What?" He almost laughed. The laugh was finding its way back. She had prayed for this every morning for 3 years, 2 months, and 11 days. Specifically, not generally. A year after the broadcast, Deshawn Marcus Simmons came home to Malam Street in Shreveport, Louisiana, on a Tuesday in August. Loretta had made his favorite meal, her red beans and rice, the kind that took all day, the kind she made for things that mattered. The house was full. Darlene, Kwame, Claudette, Naya, the pastor Mr. Harris, from next door with his new dog. Deshawn walked through the door and stood in the front room of the house where he had grown up, and he looked at the green shutters through the window, and he looked at the photograph on the nightstand that he could see from the hallway, and he looked at his mother in her kitchen, in her apron, not in the yellow dress, because the yellow dress was for the waiting, and the waiting was over. He walked into the kitchen. He said, "You need help?" She said, "You can cut the onions." He said, "You know I always cut them wrong." She said, "I know. I'll show you again." He cut them wrong in the exact same way he always had. She corrected him. He did it wrong again. She laughed until she had to hold on to the counter. Today, Deshawn Simmons works with a re-entry nonprofit in Shreveport, not as a client, as a staff member. He was hired 8 months after his release. He works with men coming out of the system, specifically on family reconnection, how to write the letter, how to ask for what you need, how to let the people who love you back in without making the love into a weight you carry instead of a thing that holds you up. He tells them about the folder. He tells them about the colored greens. He tells them that the letters their people are writing are getting through, even when they cannot say so, even when getting through looks like silence. He tells them that love is not a feeling that waits for the right moment. It is a practice. It shows up every week. It writes about the weather when it cannot write about the missing. He tells them his mother wore a yellow dress on the day he saw her face for the first time in 3 years, 2 months and 11 days, and that she had bought it for the day he came home, and that she wore it before he came home, because she knew he was coming. He always knows, when he tells this part, that the men are listening. Not with their ears, with the part of them that has a folder of letters in order, with the part of them that has not yet been allowed to come home. That is the part he is talking to. That is the part that needs to know she wore the dress. She kept writing. She kept the world alive. And it was enough. It was always going to be enough. It was more than enough. It was everything. If someone came to mind while you read this, someone you have been waiting for, or someone who is waiting for you, take one step toward them today. Not the whole distance. Just one step. And leave a comment with one word, the name of the person you are keeping the world alive for. We are here. We are listening.